In our last video, in Unit 1, we're going to talk about operations with fractions. Fractions, I know, are your favorite. So good review. But let's start first with a review of our last video with greatest common factor and lowest common multiple. And so what I'd like you to do is you're going to do both. I want you to find the greatest common factor between 14 and 21, as well as the lowest common multiple of those two. So let's start first with the greatest common factor. So if we're talking factors, we want to list the factors, right? So I would say 1 and 14, 2 and 7. And that's it for 14. Remember, not multiples, just factors. Then for 21, it would be 1 and 21, 3 and 7. So the greatest number that they both share would be the number 7. So off to the side, I'm going to write my lowest common, my greatest common factor is 7. Now my lowest common multiple is going to look a little different. I don't need to know my factors. Let's go ahead and erase that. Remember, I like to start with my biggest number, which is 21. So factors of 21 would be 21, obviously, but I know 14 doesn't go into it, so I'm going to keep going. The next multiple would be then 42. And believe it or not, 14 goes into 42 3 times. So my lowest common multiple would be 42. So believe it or not, this is going to help us when it comes to some operations with fractions. So I think it would be helpful. This is probably the most important section of this video is what do we need to do in order to add, subtract, multiply, or divide with fractions. Now when we're adding or subtracting, what you need to do first is have a common denominator. Common denominator. And then, so that would be step 1. Then you can go ahead and add your numerators. Well, if I can spell numerator, let's try that again. Whoa. At least I caught it. And then, if possible or if necessary, we would need to simplify. It's not always the case. Now, when we multiply, it's not as difficult because I think the most difficult part really is finding a common denominator. I think that's why most people don't like doing adding or subtracting fractions. But with multiplying, we just multiply. Multiply numerators and the denominators together. Then once you've done that, if necessary, you'll reduce or simplify. Then when it comes to dividing, you'll never actually do any dividing. You are going to simply multiply by the reciprocal of the second fraction. So you multiply by the reciprocal. Scooch this over, of second fraction, and of course, simplify if necessary. You always want to simplify. So let's practice. So in the first set, we are going to add and subtract. So that means we need a common denominator. So common denominator requires the lowest common multiple between the two. So looking at 3/5 and 2/15, I'm working with 5 and 15. So multiple, the lowest common multiple would be 15, right? 5 goes into 15 if I just multiply it by 3. And so I multiply the 5 by 3 and the top by 3. And now I have 9/15. And I can go ahead and add that with the 2/15 to get 11. So try the next one on your own if you feel ready. Start with finding the common denominator. So the common denominator, or the lowest common multiples, what we're finding would be 20. 10 goes into 20, and I can just change that by multiplying by 2. So now I have 18 over 20, and I can go ahead and add that with the 3 over 20. And that gives me 21 over 20, which cannot be reduced. We're going to leave it as an improper fraction. Subtracting is the same steps. The only difference is we're going to subtract the numerators. And so now this is a little bit more difficult. 6 and 15 doesn't have, like the lowest common multiple doesn't really jump out at me as like the last two did. So I'm going to list multiples of 15, starting with 15. So 6 doesn't go into 15, but 6 does go into the next multiple of 15, which is 30. So in this case, I'm going to have to manipulate both fractions. So to change 6 to 30, I would have to multiply it by 5. So that gives me 25 now over 30. Now to change the 15 to 30, I would multiply by 2. And so now I have 2 over 30. And now I can go ahead and subtract my numerators to get 23 over 30. And the last one on this page, so again, we are going to subtract. Let's start with finding my common denominator, or in this case, lowest common multiple of the two. So I always start with the largest number, which is 24. And believe it or not, 12 can go into 24 if I just multiply it by 2. And so I get 14 now over 12. I'm sorry, geez, 24. Come on, Mrs. Lewis. Minus 5 over 24. We've got the same denominator. We can go ahead and subtract, and I get 9 over 24. So when it comes to multiplying we're going to like, because all we have to do is actually multiply straight across and then reduce. Now, I will show you an interesting tip using factors, okay? So first I'm going to show you how we can just multiply straight across. Meaning I could do 3 times 22, and that gives me 66, and 11 times 9, which gives me 99. Now here I'm going to have to reduce, right? So I'm going to say, well, what is the greatest common factor between 66 and 99? Or another way of looking at it is, what can I divide into both 66 and 99? And I can actually divide out an 11. Although I realize that's actually not my greatest common factor. Believe it or not, I can take out, I can take out a 33. And that's going to give me 2/3, okay? Now, a lot of us learned a different way. Not all of us, but many of us. Before we multiply, we want to see if we can reduce in any way. So the first thing I notice is the 3 and the 9. If I cross those out, and actually they both share a 3, right? I could divide out a 3 from both of them. So if I divide 3 by itself, it's 1. 9 divided by 3 is 3. Now, when it comes to the 22 and the 11, they both share 11 in them. I can divide them both by 11. So this would be 1 and this would be 2. And now I would multiply 1 times 2 to give me 2, 1 times 3 to give me 3, and I notice I get the same answer, but I didn't have to reduce. So that's actually kind of nice. So let's try it, over here as well. Let's try it with simplifying it first. So the first thing I notice is that the 15 and the 45 both share the number 15 within it, or can be divided by 15. So 15 would become 1 and 45 would become 3. So same with the 14 and the 28. So I could divide 14 by itself. 28 divided by 14 is 2. And so now I can just go ahead and multiply my new numerator. So 1 times 2, which is 2, and 1 times 3, which is 3. Now, it's not always going to be like that. It's just ironic that they both turned out to be 2/3. Now, when it comes to dividing, remember we never actually divide. We always multiply by the reciprocal of the second fraction. So what is a reciprocal? Let's actually write that out. A reciprocal is just the inverted fraction. So for an example, the reciprocal of, let's say, 4/5 would be 5/4. So here we would take 16 over 25, and we're actually going to multiply by 15 over 8. So this is a really good example of where we're not always going to have like a 2/3 outcome, like in the last two. So looking at the 16 and the 8, they are both divisible by 8. Now the 15 and the 25 aren't necessarily divisible by 15, but they are divisible by 5. 15 divided by 5 is 3. 25 divided by 5 is 5. And now I can multiply. 2 times 3 is 6. 5 times 1 is 5. So try the next one on your own. So your first step would have been to write that as a multiplication of the reciprocal. And then let's see if we can kind of cross-reduce here. So 8 and 32 are both divisible by 8, so it'd be 1 and then 4. 12 and 48 are both divisible by 12, so it would be 1 and 4. And 4 times 1 is 4. We actually get 4 divided by 4, which is 1. All right, and the last is our application problem. So it says Mary needs to order pizza for 18 students. Each student should get 1/4 of a pizza. How many pizzas should Mary order? So I'm going to take the 18. Now I wouldn't divide. I'm going to actually multiply. They each get 1/4 of a pizza. So I need 1/4. That's how many slices I kind of need in a way. And so I multiply and I get 18 over 4. Now I could also write 18 over 1 in case that confuses you to have a whole number times a fraction. So I get 18 over 4. Now I can reduce that by dividing it by 2, and I get 9 over 4. Now when calling a pizza, restaurant, I wouldn't say, hey, I need 9/4 of a pizza, right? That doesn't make any sense. So if I change that to a decimal, that's actually going to be 2.25. So I can't order only 1/4 of a pizza, so I'm going to have to round up, right? So I'm going to round up to a total of 3 pizzas. So now in rounding up to 3, I'm obviously going to have some left over. So I would be doing 3 minus how much I need, which is actually 9/4. All right? So how do I do this in regards to a fraction? Okay, well, I need to get common denominator, right? So really, this is 3 over 1 minus 9/4. So I want my denominator to be 4, since that would be the lowest common multiple. So to change the 3 over 1 to a 4, I would multiply them both by 4. And so now that looks like 12 over 4 is, subtracting from that is 9 over 4, and I'm left with 3/4 of a pizza left.